President Zelensky has become a master of capturing the mood. He was an actor after all, and especially in this time of war, all his world is a stage. Today's stage was the memorial of Babi Yar in Kyiv, where the Nazis killed 30,000 Jews, and where this Jewish president reminds his audience that this war too is about the survival of a people. And weighing on him now must be this next phase of a war which he might end up winning, but which is now in greater danger than ever of turning nuclear. This morning they picked through the aftermath of a Russian missile attack on a civilian neighborhood in Dnipro. 4 people died in this rubble, but the Ukrainian government warned today that if the current escalation continues, these attacks could become far more devastating in a Russian attempt to break the will of the people. From the very beginning of this war, Moscow seems to have gone out of its way to produce mass civilian casualties. But this could now happen on a much greater scale. Russia's latest weapons, ballots, not bombs, the votes cast in the referendums held in the occupied areas. The 96% majority in favor of annexation may sound like parody, but the new reality it creates is deadly serious. From tomorrow, Russia will consider this an indivisible part of its land and will defend any attack here as if it was an attack against Mother Russia. President Putin will proclaim as much from the podium in Red Square tomorrow, the stage favoured by Russian tsars, old and new. Much of the world will see this theatre as proof that Vladimir Putin no longer wants a negotiated peace, that he's expanding the borders of Russia for good. Still a lover of the social distance, President Putin addressed intelligence chiefs from former Soviet states still loyal to him to tell us what makes him tick.
Following their goals, our geopolitical opponents are prepared to put anyone, any country in the line of fire, to turn it into the epicenter of a crisis, to provoke a colour revolution and unleash a bloodbath.
From curdling rhetoric to curdling sea, the gas leaks fouling the Baltic are widely blamed on Russia, trying to render the pipelines once built to fuel Germany and enrich the Kremlin unusable, also for good. But pipelines can be fixed and wars can be lost, especially if your people don't want to fight. At the spectacular Georgian border, the exodus from Russia still continues, with thousands crossing every day to avoid the draft. But another neighbour, Finland, will largely shut its border with Russia from midnight, thus closing the escape valve for draft dodgers and tourists.
To send a signal also to Russia that the war of aggression against international law that the state is waging has an impact also on ordinary citizens and on the middle class that's used to traveling to Europe.
Middle class and educated Russians may be leaving the country, but plenty are signing up to fight in a war that apparently still enjoys 70% support from the public. These pictures were released by the Russian Ministry of Defense. They intend to show the willingness to fight and the sacrifice. But that doesn't make the emotion here any less genuine. Men sent to slaughter, their own and others, a soldier's reality. And in the last hour, President Putin has perhaps acknowledged not all those called up are willing, admitting to mistakes made during the mobilization and saying that those with military experience should be called up first. Well, our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, joins us now from Kyiv in the country's east. Lindsay.
Matt, here in Kharkiv and in Kherson, one of the areas which is being colonized, as the Ukrainians would see it, by the Russians, there's been a reaction of, it's a mixture of fury and derision. They see this not just as a reimposition of the Soviet Union, but imperial Russia from centuries before. And what I was speaking to the man who President Zelensky has appointed as the governor of Kherson. He was absolutely furious about this, but he said he also understood that some people in Kherson, the bit which Russia now controls, have been coerced into voting, but others he sees as collaborators. He says the only way to deal with it is to regain that territory. And when they do regain that territory, he says, those who've orchestrated this on behalf of Russia will be met with the full face of Ukrainian law.
Our law enforcement authorities know about all of those people. Our security service of Ukraine knows, and believe me, when the Ukrainian authorities return, we will draw a clear dividing line, a clear border. Those who knowingly participated in the collaboration will be punished in accordance with Ukrainian legislation. Those who were held hostage in this situation are our people. They're innocent.
And Lindsay, what about the military situation in the northeast?
Well, that's the key issue, because this is a political and international diplomatic move by President Putin, because the Russians are losing on the battlefield. I spent today with a tank regiment who explained to me how they have similar equipment to the Russians, but how they are able to maneuver much more quickly and much better. And that is why they have managed to succeed in a counter-offensive in the northeast over the last month. And that is the key issue, because what is happening now is that a town that you mentioned, Liman, which the Russians seized in May, at the moment, the Ukrainians are surrounding that town and the Russian soldiers in it. Now, of course, anything can happen in war. We don't know how long it will take. But what we can say is that the Russians are losing at the moment. The Ukrainians are winning. And that's why the Ukrainians seem so confident despite these moves by President Putin.
Lindsay, thanks very much indeed. Well, I'm joined here on the balcony by Maria Adviva, a security analyst who is Ukrainian, of course. Thanks very much for coming here on the programme. Let's talk about the annexation, first of all, that will be announced tomorrow, slightly earlier than we'd expected, actually. I mean, that is a very dramatic fact for your country, even if your country and so much of the world rejects it.
Well, here we have to explain why Putin needs it just now and so urgently, because Russian troops were forced to flee from Kharkiv region in the course of very successful Ukrainian counteroffensive. The whole territory of Kharkiv was liberated. Ukrainian armed forces recaptured the major points, the major cities in Kharkiv region, and Putin just needs to show something to his own population, to explain and mobilize his people to support the war. And that's why he is doing this step with this annexation.
And yet he has raised the stakes by saying any attack on what used to be your country will now be his country, will be seen as a direct threat against Mother Russia. And he will respond, you know, even with nuclear weapons he's threatened. That does raise the stakes, doesn't it, significantly?
Absolutely. That's what Russia and Putin are doing. They are threatening and blackmailing the West with the nuclear weapons. And that's why we have not to react on that or react harshly and say that this is impossible and we will not do any steps that go in line with these threats. And the reaction from the United States and the Europe so far, and from Britain, of course, was in the line. So everyone said that we will not accept nor these threats nor the annexation of the occupied territories.
I never thought I would have to ask this question, but we do have to ask it. Are we now one step closer to the possibility of a nuclear war in Europe?
I don't think that Putin will dare to go to the nuclear war, but there is a
How can you be sure?
Well, you never know what's in his mind. You know, we were not expecting the full-scale invasion in the center of Europe, but now here we are in the 7th month of the war. So the possibility is that he might at the end use tactical nuclear weapons and to show the strength, because he is all the time speaking about how great Russian Empire will be under his rule. So he might do that, but I think that all the efforts that are now being done to show Russia that it won't work, this will help.
But if he uses tactical nuclear weapons, which are not as bad as, you know, the big stuff, but it's still very, very bad and would be a new development in any war, there will be a response from the United States, right?
Yes, that's what...
And there could be a spiral into something much worse.
That's what the experts are speaking about, and that's why I'm pretty sure that he will not dare for this step. that he will continue blackmailing, as Russia is doing, for example, with Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, having the military presence there. And what might happen, and what I think Russia will try to do, is, as you know, they are only occupying parts of the territories of Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Lugansk, and Kherson. And so they will probably try to push forward and occupy more territories on the east of Ukraine. For that, we have to account and be ready for that. And for that, Ukraine needs more weapons to stop Putin.